So far in this section, we have learned about services and dependency injection in great detail. Now, in the very first lecture of this section, we learned that we can use services for component interaction. And with services, interaction between two components, two non-related components is very easy. And that's what we are going to see in this lecture. In this lecture, we will learn how we can pass data from one component to another component using services in Angular. And to understand this, in the UI, I have done few changes. So if I open this source folder and if I open this app folder, let's go to this header folder. And in there, we have our admin component. And in the admin component, I have created a new component called user detail. And if I expand this user detail component, and if you go to the HTML of this user detail component, here we have a very simple HTML. Currently, we are hard coding some value here. So this is the first change. I have created a new component called user detail. And the second change is in the user list component. If I go to HTML of this user list component, there I have also added one button element. So this is the second change. And if you notice this user list component and this user detail component, these are sibling components. They do not have a parent-child relationship. So if I go to the web page and if you go to this admin page, there you will notice that for each user detail, we have this plus button. And if I scroll down, we are also displaying the detail of the user. So this detail we are displaying from user detail component. And currently in there, we are hard coding these values. But now what we want is whenever the plus button of any one of these users is clicked, we want to show that user's detail here. Okay, so for example, if I click on this plus button, then the details of Steve Smith should be displayed here. If I click on this plus button, then the details of Mary Jane should be displayed here. And again, we are displaying this user list in the user list component. And we are displaying the details of the user in the user detail component. So here what we want is when this click event on this button element happens in the user list component, we want to display data in the user detail component. Let's see how we can achieve that. For that, the first thing which we are going to do is on this button, we are going to bind click event. So let's go to VS Code and on this button element, let's go ahead and let's bind click event. And whenever this click event happens, we want to call a method, maybe show user details. Let's go ahead and let's create this method in our component class. So let's go to user list component.ts and in there, let's go ahead and let's create this method. And it should be show user details. Let's change the spelling mistake here as well. Okay. All right. Here what we want is when this show user details method is called, we want to call an event and from that event, we want to emit the details of that particular user. Now, where do we have our users? We have our users in the user service, right? So let's first see what is the error we have here. So the method name is show user details. Let me copy this method and let me paste it here. All right. So let's go to our user service. And for that, we need to go to this services folder and there we have our user service. So in this user service, we already have this get all users method and create user method. Now what I want is in here, I want to create an event. I'm going to call this event on user details clicked. Okay, so this is going to be an event. And if you remember, in order to create an event, we use event emitter. And in order to use this event emitter, we need to import it from Angular/Go. So in here, let's go ahead and let's import it from Angular/Go. And then inside these angle brackets, we need to specify the type of the data which this event is going to emit. Now here, this event is going to emit a user detail. So here, the type is going to be user. Okay. And then in order to create an event emitter, we need to instantiate it. For that, we can use this new keyword followed by event emitter. Again, here also we need to specify the type of data we are going to emit. That is going to be of type user. Okay, and here we don't need to use this set of parentheses. All right, so here we are creating an event. Now we might also want to emit this event. So for that, we are going to create a method. I'm going to call this method on show user details. Okay, and from within this method, first we are going to access that event, and the name of the event is on user details clicked. And on that, we are going to call emit method in order to emit that event. And when that event is emitted, what do we want to do? We want to emit a user detail. So let's say we are going to get that user detail when this method will be called. So whoever will call this onShowUserDetails method, it has to pass the value for that user object. So here I'm going to call it as user, and again it is going to be of type user class. All right. So what we have done so far, in the user service class, we have created an event and we are emitting that event using this onShowUserDetails method. Now, when do we want to emit this event? We want to emit this event whenever a user clicks on this plus button. So basically, we want to emit this event from within this show user details method. For that, we are already getting an instance of this user service class here inside this user service property. So here we will say this dot user service dot, and there we have this method on show user details. Okay. Now here we also need to pass the value for the user object, the user object for which the user has clicked the plus button. So for that, let's go back to the view template. Let's go to user list component.html. And when we are calling this click method, there we will have that user object because we are looping over this user list. And for each iteration, we will have this user object. So we are going to pass that user object to this show user details method. So let me go ahead and let me pass this user object to that method. And in the component class, let's also specify a parameter here. Let's call it user. It is going to be of type user class. Now, in order to use this user class inside this user list component, we need to import it. So let's go ahead and let's import it. And now let's pass this user parameter to this onShowUserDetails method. And when we are calling this onShowUserDetails method of this user service, what it is going to do, it is going to emit this event. And when this event is emitted, we want to emit the data which we are going to receive for this user object. So let's go ahead and let's emit it from here. Again, let me recap what we have done so far. So what we have done is, on this button, we have added click event. Whenever the click event will happen, we are calling the show user details method. And to that method, we are passing the current user object for which this button has been clicked. Then in the show user details method, what we are doing is we are calling this on show user details method of user service. And there also we are passing the current user object for which the button has been clicked. Now, if we go to this user service, there inside this on show user details method, we are emitting this on user details clicked event. And when this event is being emitted, we are emitting the details of the user for which the plus button has been clicked. So basically, we are emitting the details of selected user. Now, we want to display the details of that user in this user detail component, right? So in the user detail component, what we are going to do is we are first going to create a property. I'll call it user, or maybe I'll call it selected user. It is going to be of type user. So again, in order to use this user class, we need to import it from this file. Now, I'm also going to implement ng on init method here. Okay. And since we are using this ng on init method here, let me go ahead and let me implement on init interface. And in order to use this on init interface, we need to import it from angular/go. All right. So what we want to do is inside this user details component, we want to subscribe to this on user details clicked event. So whenever this event happens, whenever this event is emitted, we want this user detail component class to be notified about that. For that, we need to subscribe to that event. And to subscribe to that event, first of all, we need to create an instance of this user service class. Now, instead of creating that instance explicitly, what we will do is we will ask Angular to inject an instance of this user service class inside this user detail class. For that, again, I'll create a property. I'll call it user service. And here, in order to tell Angular that it has to inject an instance of user service class here, I'm going to use inject method. And in order to use this inject method, we also need to import it from angular/go. And there, let's specify the type as user service. Okay, and in order to use this user service, again, we need to import it from this file. So in this way, we will have an instance of this user service class inside this user service property. Now using that instance, let's say this dot user service dot, and inside this user service, we have an event called on user details clicked, and we want to subscribe to that event. Okay, so basically, whenever this event is emitted, this user detail component class will be notified about it. And that will happen because we are subscribing to that event. Now here, behind the scenes, the concept of observable is being used. Basically, whenever this event will happen, it is going to emit an observable, and we are subscribing to that observable. But I will not go into details of observable here because we have not talked about it yet, and we are going to talk about it in the future lectures of this course. But for now, just understand that here we are subscribing to this event inside this user detail component class. Now, since we have subscribed to this event using this subscribe method, whenever this event will be raised, we know that it is going to emit the user details, right? So whenever this event will be raised, since we have subscribed to it, we will get that data as an argument to the callback function, which we can pass to this subscribe method. So to this subscribe method, we can pass a callback function, and this callback function will be executed whenever this event will be raised. So when this event will be raised, it is going to emit some data. Basically, it is going to emit the user detail. So we are going to receive that user detail as an argument to this callback function. And we know that the type of that data is going to be user. It is going to be of type user class, right? So now inside this callback function, we can simply go ahead and we can set the selected user. So for that, we can say this dot selected user equal to this data, because we know that inside this data parameter, we are going to receive a user detail. Okay, so with that user detail, we are setting this selected user property. Now, just to check if it is working, let's simply go ahead and let's log this selected user. Let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page. Let me open developer console and let me clear everything here. Let's go to admin tab, and here we have an error and it says no provider for user service. And we have this error because if you remember in the last lecture, we had specified an injection token for this user service. So if I go to app module, you see there we are specifying this user token. So this user token is basically the injection token for this service. So now we need to use this user token inside this user detail component. So let's go ahead and let's import that user token from app module. And let's go ahead and let's use this user token instead of user service. And now if we go to the web page, and if I go to this admin tab, now we don't have any error. Let me clear the console here and let me click on this plus button. So you will notice that a user object has been logged with the details of the selected user. So currently I have selected the first user. So the details of that user has been displayed here. If I click on the last user, this Mark Tyler, then the details of that user has been logged here. Okay, so what is happening here is whenever this plus button is being clicked in the user service, this event is being raised. And whenever this event is being raised, it is going to emit the details of the user which we have selected. Okay, and we are logging that in the user detail component here. So now we don't want to log it here. Instead, we want to show the detail in the UI. For that, we are going to make use of this selected user property. So if we go to the view template of this user detail component, there what we want is, instead of using these hard-coded values, we want to use the selected user property. Okay, and this selected user is going to have a name property. So we want to use that name property. Let me copy this syntax from here. And here I want to use the gender property of that selected user. Then here I want to use the subtype property of that selected user. Okay, and here I want to use the status property of that selected user. Okay, so we know that each user is going to have a name property, a gender property, the subtype property, and status property. Now for the image, what I want is, here I want to use property binding. And in there, I want to set the avatar image based on the gender. So first of all, I will wrap this complete thing within single quotes like this. And this value here, it should change based on the gender. So here, instead of saying male, what I will do is I will use two single quotes. I'll use this plus, and in there, I'll specify the gender property, selected user dot gender. Okay, let's see if it works or not. So let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page. Let me close this console. Let's go to this admin tab and let me scroll down a little bit. So currently, if you see, no user has been selected. So no details is being displayed here. But when I click on this plus button of one of the users, the details of that user has been displayed. If I click on this user, the details of that user has been displayed. And if I click on this plus button, the details of the last user has been displayed. Now, for some reason, the avatar image is not coming here. Let's check why is that. And I think that's because this gender, it is going to have its first letter in uppercase. So what we will do is we will convert this gender to all lowercase. For that, we will use this to lowercase method. Now let's save the changes and let's see if it has fixed that issue. So let me click on this one, and now you can see that avatar image is also coming. If I select this user who is a female, then for that user, the female avatar image is coming. So now it is working. Now what I also want is initially when there is no user selected, I don't want to display this component at all. So for that, let's go back to VS Code, and there, first of all, let me remove this div because we are not using it. Okay, and here I will use ng if directive, and to that I will assign selected user. Okay, so if no user is selected, in that case this selected user will be undefined, and undefined is a falsy value. So in that case, this div will not be displayed. But if some user is selected, in that case, that will not be a falsy value, that will be a truthy value. In that case, this div will be displayed. Let's quickly verify if it is working or not. So let's go to this admin page, and initially that component has not been rendered. Let me click on the first user. So now the details of that user is being displayed. If I click on third user, the details of third user has been displayed. If I click on second user, the details of second user has been displayed. But initially when the page loads, at that time, since no user is selected, now that component is not being displayed. So this functionality is also working. So as you can see, passing data from one component to another component using services is quite easy. In this example, let me close this HTML file, and let me also close this user list component HTML. So in this example, what we wanted is we wanted to pass data from user list component to user detail component. Basically, when the click event will happen in the user list component, we want to display the details of the clicked user in the user detail component. And this user detail and user list, they are sibling components. They do not have parent-child relationship. But we wanted to pass data between the user list component and user detail component. Here, we are going to select the user in the user list component. And we want to display the details of that selected user in the user detail component. For that, we needed to pass the selected user from the user list component to the user detail component. And for that, we made use of services. All we did is inside the service, we created an event, and we are raising that event using this onShowUserDetails method. And where are we calling this onShowUserDetails method? We are calling this method whenever in the user list component a user is selected. That means the plus button of any user list is clicked. So when that plus button is clicked, we are binding this show user details method to that click event. And from within this method, we are basically calling this on show user details method, which is going to raise this on user details clicked event. And when this event is raised, we are emitting the selected user data. Now, in the user detail component, what we are doing is we are subscribing to that event. So whenever this event will be raised, whenever this event will happen, since we have subscribed to that event, this component will get a notification that that event has occurred. And it will also get the data which that event has emitted. And We are assigning that data to the selected user property. And in this way, using services, we can communicate between any two components, whether they are related or not, in a very simple way. Alright, so this was all about services and dependency injection in Angular. I hope this section has been useful for you and you learned a lot from this section. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.